in the human family, there are only small variations. But by definition, the human species is diverse. That's what we call the genetic polymorphism. So when modificating small details, you can, in fact, encompass the complete range of facial morphology. So the aim of biological anthropology is first to describe the human variation and then try to interpret, to explain it. The founding father in France of physical anthropology is Professor Paul Broca. Is the one who also initialized our collection of skeletons. And at the time, the tools used to measure the skulls were the simple. Shortly after, a little more than one generation after, Karl Steiner discovered the blood groups, and physical anthropology became biological anthropology and integrated genetic DNA studies in his perceptions. However, biometry is still a tool available with new technology, and of course, with the help of scanners, we can now go deeper into the study of anatomy. But the theoretical foundation of this biometrical approach is the fact that your physical characteristics are in part inheritable. Here you have the example of the royal family of Spain, and it's the Habsburg family. They are characterized by a very strong chin. And you see from the 16th century up to the father of the present king of Spain, they transmitted the gene of this especially strong chin. So it proved that somewhere in the DNA there are genes who are coding for the shape of the skull. Now, using imagery technology, here it's the example of an Egyptian mummy head that we have in our collection. We can, without any invasive technique, unwrap the coverage of the head, and by this tool permitting some transparency, deflesh the head and study the skeleton. And for the Maori head is the same principle. You have the scan, the radiological scan, which allows to erase the flesh and then to obtain the image of the skull. And then this skull can be compared to other skulls because anthropological literature is full of measurements of skulls. So we have a very large data bank on skulls. We cannot measure directly the heads because they are not like living people, because they are desiccated. So we have to use bone landmarks. And when using bones, of course, we can slice virtually the skulls and make some measurements. And Chloé Vanier, later in the afternoon, will show you in live how we can do. But whatever are the techniques, we can measure anatomy and then compare to a statistical series of comparison. But sometimes, when some of the heads were in fact exposed, they were put on a pole and the base of the skull is destroyed. So some of the landmarks are also destroyed. So for this study, I used only 6 measurements, the skull length on the profile, and on the face, we have the maximal skull breadth, the breadth of the face, which we call bizygomatic breadth, the height of the face, and the nose dimensions. When we do that at the mankind level, we can see that the population, the computer will use, for instance, 7 measurements, will make a representation in 7 dimensions, and then a projection on 2 dimensions. And you see that all the populations of the world occupy a position related to their genetic proximity. And when you use a map of the world, you can see that there is more or less a good fitness between the geographical origin of the population and their morphological resemblance. So it's this kind of property that we use to make the expertise on the provenance of, for instance, an unknown skull that is brought to the police, for instance. And what can be noted is that, in fact, there is a continuity, a cline, genetic cline, which also include morphological clines. And on the first axis of this multivariate analysis, you can see that nose breadth is the main component, and you go at the left from people with narrow noses up to people with very large, wide noses, which is also a northern to southern gradient. And on the perpendicular axis, you can see that it's the face width, this bizygomatic diameter, which increase from the west to the east. So we can identify clusters of populations, and with only 2 dimensions, it's already possible to imagine what could be the origin. And the more you add variables, the more you add in precision in your analysis. Now, this approach has been used by many physical anthropologists. Here you have the results of somebody who did extensive studies on skulls of populations, mainly of Asia and the Pacific, Pietrusewski. And his main result, he used 29 measurements, so a very detailed study. The position of the New Zealand Aboriginal people is here, so it belongs to the wider ensemble of the Polynesian populations. Close to them, you have the Melanesian Islands, and further, the Australian Tasmania. And on the other side, you have Southeast Asia, Northern Continental Asia, Japan, and some Taiwanese Aboriginal populations. And you can see that one of them is not so far morphologically of the New Zealand people. It's also a story that genetic DNA studies is able to tell us. Now, this is the main result which I obtained from this analysis. There are many, but I have to summarize, so this slide is necessary. So previously, you had means of population. Each dot was the mean of a series, a statistical series. Here, each dot is one individual. So I used the 336 individuals with the 6 variables which I used, I presented to you before. And the different colors correspond to the different peoples who were used in the analysis, knowing that we have here in the Musée de l'Homme 4 heads. One of them, strangely, is only a skin which has been nailed on a plaster skull, so this could not be measurable, and we suspect that, in fact, the skull was removed to be studied, as now we remove the flesh with the scanners, but at the time they made an autopsy of the body, and as the skin was so remarkable with this kind of tattoos, so they then fixed the skin and the hair on the plaster. So by definition, this was not measurable. So there were 3 other heads, which I can now present to you. So the correlation between the axis, the horizontal axis and the vertical axis are related to some physical characteristic. And the strongest correlation is nearly 1, so the maximal correlation is a relation between the vertical axis and the height of the face. So the more these individuals are on the diagram, the more their height, their facial height is important. Anyway, so in red you have the 3 heads from the Musée de l'Homme. In green here is a Taiwanese Aboriginal series. Here you have some people from Melanesia, Fiji Islands. Here it's from Micronesia, from Guam. And in blue it's Hawaii. It's also one of the origin of the migration. And in yellow, it's a population, the Moriori, who lived and still live, fortunately, in the Chatham Islands. So it belongs to New Zealand. But at the time, there were raids of Maori against Moriori. So many people were killed. And that's one of the reasons why many skeletons probably are in the museums. And here we have a series of genuine Maori people. So here you have the side of the sample. They are not always very important, but to compare with 3 heads, it was enough. So what can be concluded from this analysis is that clearly our 3 heads belong to the Polynesian variation and to the Maori variation. What cannot be excluded, then we have to ask DNA or the analysis of tattoo to conclude, it cannot be excluded that they are not genuinely Maori, but they could be Moriori. It depends then on what can be done by other techniques. Clearly, the conclusion is that biometry itself is only one line of evidence. It's the one that I wish to present to you because it's one part of the expertise, but it's not enough. So comparison with tattoos and DNA is, of course, necessary. DNA, we will show with the next presentations, is not always available. But in any case, we have a large overlap of characters, so we can only make statistical studies to attribute any head or any skull to a given population. But what is shown by this kind of studies, either DNA or biometric studies, is the long history of migrations of mankind from Africa. This dates from about 200,000 years in the out of Africa theory. And then this migration and the peopling of the Pacific, as President Buff told earlier, is one of the most fascinating stories in mankind. The colonization of these small islands scattered in an immense ocean, and some of the islands were reached only recently. Anyway, what can be shown by this kind of biological anthropology studies is that we share a common origin. We are all related. My blood is your blood is my blood. Thank you. Pour résumer ce que j'ai dit, donc l'anthropométrie n'est pas seulement une science du 19e siècle, même si elle a été fondée au 19e siècle, y compris par Broca. Elle utilisait des techniques encore simples et les nouvelles techniques d'imagerie permettent d'aller plus loin. Elles sont donc complémentaires des études sur l'ADN. Elles sont moins précises, mais elles procèdent du même principe, à savoir que certains de nos caractères anatomiques sont codés dans l'ADN. Simplement, on ne sait pas exactement où. Ce ne sont pas des gènes simples, ce sont des caractères à hérédité multiple, mais il n'est pas douteux que l'on ressemble à ses parents, que quelqu'un de son propre groupe vous ressemble plus morphologiquement que quelqu'un qui habite à l'autre bout de la Terre. Et comme on le montre dans les familles royales qui sont endogames, donc dans lesquelles les mêmes gènes circulent, eh bien le menton des Habsbourg ou le nez des Bourbons est bien la preuve que de génération en génération, on se transmet des caractères de ressemblance. Et donc ces propriétés permettent d'étudier la variation de l'espèce humaine, et on peut montrer qu'il y a, quand on utilise un certain nombre de mesures, et qu'on projette ça en 2 dimensions avec les analyses en composantes principales, que 2 axes sont importants, la largeur du nez et le diamètre du visage, et que, en tout cas pour partie, il s'agit d'adaptations, notamment climatiques, qui attestent de l'histoire du genre humain. Pour revenir à l'expertise des têtes, puisqu'il était important de savoir si effectivement elle provenait bien de Nouvelle-Zélande, parce qu'on sait que même des têtes d'Européens ont été maquillées en têtes maories. Donc la mesure des 3 têtes dont disposait le Musée de l'Homme a permis de montrer qu'elles appartenaient bien à l'ensemble polynésien, et qu'on ne pouvait pas exclure qu'en dehors du peuple maori lui-même, il pouvait appartenir à des ennemis du peuple maori, c'est-à-dire en particulier les Moriori. Et là, il faut interroger d'autres techniques pour en faire la preuve. Je vous remercie.